What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we need to have a little bit of a look at some Transformers TCG rules. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The lovely folks over on the official Transformers TCG Facebook have given their weekly rules update, and it would be frankly rude if I didn't fill you in on the main points and what you needed to know with explanations and pictures and all that good stuff. So let's start off having a quick look at triple changes. Nice and simply, it's all to do with the fact they have two alt modes. So let's use Blitzwing as our example. Blitzwing has alt mode 1 and alt mode 2. So what mode do you start in? We all know you start in alt mode, but which alt mode? Alt mode 1. I know, sorry, that's quite a simple answer. It's fairly straightforward. They start in alt mode 1. What happens if your opponent plays cornered though? You're in bot mode, your opponent drops a cornered, forces you into alt mode. Well, there's two alt modes. At that point, you do get a choice, ladies and gentlemen. You get to decide into which alt mode you flip. Very nice indeed. Now, Optimus Prime Battlefield Legend has been out for a little while, but Focus Fire has not. And Optimus Prime Battlefield Legend has a skill that allows you to play one of the actions you flipped when flipping battle cards for your attack. Well, how does that interact with Focus Fire? Focus Fire, for every Focus Fire you've played this turn, one of your characters gets bold 1 until end of turn. And you can obviously play all three of them because there are 3 in total. You can get up to a very large amount of bold using Focus Fire. Very nice indeed. What happens if you flip this and choose to use it during Optimus Prime's attack? Yes, of course you can play the others. If you flip this while attacking with Optimus Prime, if you've got other Focus Fire in hand, you can play them down. The card says you can. Here's the problem though. Your attack has already started, so the bold wouldn't do anything. Sorry about that. Bold's got to be there before you're attacking. When you're attacking, it's too late. So even though you would essentially be able to play all 3 Focus Fire in one turn, they would actually do nothing. Here's an interesting question. Let's say you're playing Treasure Hunt, but there are fewer than 4 cards left in your deck. Well, hang on a second. What happens there? You just immediately shuffle up when you need to, scrap the top 2 cards of your deck, and then you immediately shuffle up, make your scrap pile into a new deck, and then scrap the next 2. And then you put as many upgrades as you want into your hand. We've kind of seen this before. This really is just proper confirmation of you shuffle up the second you run out of cards in your deck. Although I believe we have been told that definitively before. Speaking of stuff we've kind of been told before, when a combiner is KO'd, it is in the KO area as the combiner. Now, this came around because of Dirge this week, because of course Dirge has a skill whereby you get extra attack for each bot in your opponent's scrap pile or KO pile. To be specific, in alt mode you get +1 attack for each character in your opponent's KO area. So Volcanicus is either +1 attack or it's +5 attack. Yeah, but we know that combiners are KO'd as one character, so unfortunately, it's only +1. Now, Chop Chop's kind of a weird one, and I believe we've gone through these before, but it does behoove us to clarify just a little bit. So Chop Chop here, what causes a confusion for some players is this skill in bot mode. When you attack, you may move an upgrade from one of your other characters to this one. Well, can you move an upgrade over that would normally be attached to him? No. No, you can't. So, to take Turbo Boosters as an example, Turbo Boosters is an upgrade that can only be attached to cars. Chop Chop is not a car, so you wouldn't be able to move it over. Hey ho. Similarly, do effects on upgrades that trigger when equipped activate if Chop Chop takes them? And the answer is yes. Yes, they do. So to take Crushing Size as an example, when you put Crushing Size onto a character, you get to, well, it's a little bit disruptive. You get to scrap an enemy utility, and if you can't draw a card. So when you move that over to Chop Chop, you would be able to use it right away. Now, we've also had a bunch of questions this week about Dreadwing. Dreadwing is that 2-character combiner we looked at recently. I'll pop a link to that video in the description. So Dreadwing has 2 slots for both weapons, armor, and utilities. So what happens if you have 2 aerial recon on Dreadwing? Now, this is one of those I think is fairly obvious, but it does make sense to just double check with it. When the upgraded character attacks or defends, look at the top card of your deck, you may scrap it. So essentially, you just do this twice. There we go. You look at the top card with aerial recon, the first one, and you either keep it or scrap it. And then when you do that again, you either keep it or scrap it. Now, if you chose to keep it with the first aerial recon, there's a pretty good chance you're going to choose to keep it with the second, but that doesn't mean you have to. And similarly, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, scrap them both. What's important is you do these one at a time. You do not look at the top 2 cards, because that would give you extra information. If you looked at the top 2 cards of your deck, that might make you scrap the top card, even though you wouldn't usually do so. So if you've got 2 of these, you get to do them in any order, which is just clearly one after another. Here's a really weird one. Dreadwind and Blackwing, the 2 constituent bots, are both in the KO area. If you combine them, Dreadwing would still be KO'd. What happens if you play I Still Function on one of them, then combine them? Well, you can't combine them when they're in the KO area. If we have a look at Blackwing, and don't worry, Dreadwind has a similar ability, the equivalent ability. At the end of your turn, if you've got Dreadwind air defense in bot mode on the battlefield or in your KO area, you may scrap 3 cards from your hand. If you do combine them into Dreadwing, well, that's kind of irrelevant. You can't use the skill after your KO. That would be silly. However, what happens if you use I Still Function on one of them when they're both in the KO area and combine them? And the answer is, it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you, because I Still Function KOs the character at the end of turn. So either you get one of them back, combine, and it's KO'd at end of turn, or you get one of them back, don't combine, and it's KO'd at end of turn. To put it simply, you can either have both bots individually in the KO area, or you can have Dreadwing in the KO area combined, but you cannot use I Still Function to cheat your way into an extra combiner. That will not work. So to go back to Dreadwing having 2 of each type of upgrade, or 2 of each type of upgrade slot, what about combat training? Because combat training, if you've got a weapon, you get bold 1. If you've got an armor, you get tough 1. And here we're taking just a literal reading of this card. If you have a weapon, you have bold 1. You do not have bold 1 per weapon. If you have a weapon, you have bold 1. So you never ask the question, how many weapons does it have on there? You ask the question, does it have a weapon? If yes, bold 1. You don't get extra bold for extra weapons. But again, all you really do here is just read the card as written. Now here's a very, very interesting one. Erratic Lightning, that's one of these really fun new cards that gives you +3 attack, but gives you -1 defense. The answer is, does that include the blue flips? Now, a lot of the time, this is not going to matter. But something like Autobot Jazz that has 0 defense, this absolutely does matter. So if you've got Autobot Jazz, Erratic Lightning won't put you down to -1 defense. But if you are defending and you flip 2 blue icons, that gives you essentially 2 defense at the conclusion of the battle when you resolve, and that would be brought down to 1. So I've talked, and a bunch of people have talked about Erratic Lightning not lowering the defense of 0 defense characters, but actually we do need to remember here, if you flip blue icons, it will still have an effect. Speaking of Autobot Jazz, it's got a redonk skill, one I really, really love. When you defend against an enemy that doesn't have Pierce, and you flip at least 2 white icons, this cannot take more than 2 damage from an attack. So what happens if you've got a force field attached, and then you flip 2 white icons? And the answer here is extremely simple. You do the ability before you do the force field. So Jazz's ability brings you down to 2 damage, And then you look at force field and go, oh, I'm not taking 5 or more damage, so force field stays on. If you don't get the ability for Autobot Jazz, then Force Field will save you. But if you get the ability for Autobot Jazz, Force Field doesn't do anything. It's just there in case you don't hit the ability with Autobot Jazz. We also got confirmation this week that MOTORMASTER does not block Bombing Run. And again, this makes absolute perfect sense. MOTORMASTER in alt mode says that your other characters cannot take non-attack damage from your opponent's cards. Well, Bombing Run doesn't do damage, it moves damage. Bombing Run doesn't inflict damage, Bombing Run doesn't cause damage, Bombing Run moves damage, and MOTORMASTER stops damage being done, so you could still use Bombing Run to move damage to a non-MOTORMASTER character, even if MOTORMASTER is on the field in alt mode. But again, that makes sense because you're moving damage, you're not really doing damage. And then finally here, does Peace Through Tyranny do damage to a character when it is KO'd, or does it just move you to the KO area? Now this is incredibly important when we're looking at combiners. So if we take Volcanicus as an example because I love him, all of these combiners, when you combine them, you get the sum total of damage counters on all your characters. So let's take something like the new Dinobot Snarl. And let's say there is no damage on Dinobot Snarl. This is an incredibly important question. Because if Peace Through Tyranny just moves it to the KO area, then it forms into Volcanicus, bringing no damage. If, however, it does 9 damage to KO it, then it transforms into Volcanicus and brings 9 damage with it. And the answer is actually not really to do with how much damage Peace Through Tyranny does or doesn't do. The answer very simply is, it doesn't really matter because any character in the KO area is always seen as having as many damage counters on as it has health. We looked at this recently with overkilling a character. The rule here, nice and simply, any character in the KO area always has damage counters on it equal to the health written on the card. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. Another week of lovely ruling queries. Some of these took us a little by surprise. Some of these seem fairly obvious, but please do remember, and I'm a teacher by trade, and this is going to make me sound a little bit teachery, sometimes people just need answers to these questions. Sometimes they're not entirely clear. Sometimes they get confused. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's nice to have confirmation for some of this stuff. And I, for one, love that Transformers do this on a weekly basis. It's awesome. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, they're the rules for this week. Tell me what you think about them in the comment section. Go nuts. But do please remember to be nice. And then make sure you like this video and subscribe so that you get all these rules, queries, and everything else Transformers that you could possibly need brought to you. Oh yeah, and please do make sure you follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, where we talk about Transformers and other games. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Plays.